All right, and hello. My name is Keith Olden from Squawkonomics, and we are having a interview today with David Moskowitz from Bitcoin Singapore and Coin Republic. He is quite a rising figure in the Singapore Bitcoin community. David, thank you so much for your time being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me onto the call.
Great. The first thing that I wanted to mention was, I just got back from Singapore, as you know, and we just did the second version of the Bitcoin Squawk series for Squawkonomics. And when we were there, we asked people like what they would prefer, Bitcoin or gold, and the results were surprising.
Okay.
Not what I was expecting at all, and we got quite a different view that might very well shake up the meme of what people have with Bitcoin and gold and things like that. So I wanted to ask you, where do you see things going in Singapore, like versus do you think that there's more acceptance towards gold or Bitcoin? I mean, what do you actually see on the streets there? And is there a difference between what different ethnic groups or what different nationalities would pick about gold or Bitcoin? Or, I mean, what's going on with that?
Yeah, first off, I'd like to thank you for doing that first video. We're somewhat insulated in a Bitcoin community where we talk to each other about Bitcoin all the time. We think everybody knows about it and their opinion on it, and we really don't. We only know our little circle. So you going out and asking people their opinion, really invaluable as far as understanding where people are at on adoption and acceptance and, what their general appeal of Bitcoin is to them, if there is any, if they've heard of it. I mean, what you've done is great. I really look forward to this video. I saw the one where you did it for gold and Bitcoin in Taiwan, and really like that one. So really looking forward to seeing what people in Singapore have to say about it.
Right.
As far as ethnic differences, well, you have to actually be quite careful about what you say about that here. But as far as ethnics, I would say that you have a tradition of gold in places like India, so I would expect people of Indian origin to have more of an affiliation towards gold. And then perhaps, but it's very hard to say because we have a very tech-savvy society here. So, you kind of prep me for this by saying that it's surprising. So I'm kind of inclined to say, well, maybe, the high rate of tech activism here actually leads to a higher acceptance of Bitcoin.
You actually might be a little closer to the mark when you're talking about a technologically adept society picks up Bitcoin just a little bit more than, say, other cities. But we'll leave it at that for right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thank you. I'm glad that you appreciate what we're trying to do and just bring awareness as far as what the average people out there like really think about Bitcoin. So that's great. You are considered thought leader and an expert as far as what's going on with Bitcoin in the Singapore community, and I wanted to bring up something that Georgi Ivanov, one of our market entry analysts, said about Bitcoin just a couple days ago, and it caused quite a bit of a stir in the sense that he was talking about cryptocurrencies, as far as the entire market, seem to be stagnating and kind of flailing from side to side without really a lot of stability. And he proposed an idea of basically taking gold and backing it as a gold standard for the cryptocurrency market, and essentially turning that into Bretton Woods of 2014 for cryptocurrencies, or whatever year it would be implemented. I'm kind of on the fence with that, and I kind of like to ask you what you mean by what you think about this. Like, if Bitcoin is as good as gold, it should be exchangeable for gold, and that would really bring Bitcoin to more of a trusted standard. If you could, whenever you would want to get out of Bitcoin, you could be guaranteed that amount in gold. Do you think that would, however, put too much pressure on the cryptocurrency markets to perform at too high of an expectation that maybe it would not be mature enough to deal with at this point? Or would it be alternative? Would it provide the basis of confidence that the cryptocurrency market needs to move forward? I mean, what do you think about this idea of a gold standard behind all the cryptocurrencies?
Well, I would say to start with, it's been done before. It was called e-gold, and eventually the United States government went after them and convicted them for a minor money laundering offense, even though they really were not involved in that. So they essentially decapitated the head of the e-gold exchange and therefore destroyed the entire exchange. So I think anytime you're pegging a cryptocurrency to a commodity, you have some sort of centralization of it, or some sort of agency that has to exchange that gold for the cryptocurrency. So they're going to be vulnerable towards government intimidation and things like that. Now, that being said, there's no reason that as an individual or as a private company or a private government, you couldn't either float a cryptocurrency that had this and essentially let the marketplace decide, or you couldn't issue what's now called a colored coin, which is basically a smaller unit of Bitcoin connected to the gold. And Ripple is doing that here. We have Ripple Singapore, which has gold-backed ripples. So you could certainly do that. I would say, I'm not really one to say you should or shouldn't do something like that. I would say if you think that it's a good idea, go out and try it and see if the market responds to it.
We are in a very experimental stage of the market at this time. Why not try everything and see, what's the best implementation to get things going forward?
But I don't see any reason to peg Bitcoin to it. We are very volatile, and volumes certainly follow the price, and part of the reason for the stagnation in volumes has to do with the price decrease. As you see in any market, whether it be the share market or the Bitcoin cryptocurrency market, whenever you have that increasing share price, people get excited, and that creates increasing volume.
Okay, very interesting. I'd like to still stick on the gold topic, and I'd like to talk about the news revelation about the London and gold silver fixing, and more importantly, the evidence that we're getting behind that. And from my background, as far as economic crime investigation and things like that, I'm very concerned about market manipulation, and we've seen it happen in the gold market. We've seen a lot less volatility, and we've seen a lot less price movement since Wall Street really came into the cryptocurrency market in around November or December or so. And I want to ask you, what are some ways that we can prevent manipulation of the cryptocurrency market to ensure that we don't end up with a manipulated market just like gold and silver became?
Yeah, I'm not really qualified to answer that, to be honest. It's a very thinly traded market, so I know if I do a large buy for a client, I can affect the market 1 or 2% quite quickly. I mean, eventually it comes back pretty quickly too, but it's pretty thinly traded. So
Okay.
I suppose it is prone to that. If someone did want to come in and buy up a large block of Bitcoin.
Well, sure, you have these phantom wallets that are huge, and you notice they're only in use when, let's just say, if a price moves up too much and doesn't seem to be used for any other utility other than that. So I was just wondering what you thought about that, because I mean, you're on the ground. I mean, you're in the thick of it with changes, so you know what I'm talking about with these wallets, and it's happening with other cryptocurrencies as well. And that just makes me wonder, I mean, did we just create a new form of money only for it to be manipulated as much as gold or silver has?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly a threat of it, that you could have some big players coming in and pushing prices around. Hopefully the market cap will increase to the point where that'll be less viable. But I think it was currently around $6 billion. It's certainly possible.
How do you think that we cross the threshold past the 12 billion total cryptocurrency market cap? I think personally, once we get into 15, once we get into 18, we'll start to get some momentum. But what's surprising is that there's so little, you would expect the market, just by the basis of all the news that's been all around the world, that it should have went up more than it did.
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting. We had this huge run-up based on, I mean, purely speculation out of China, and we didn't have really the merchant side of it to compensate for that. And now we have tremendous merchant adoption, and much less speculation side, and the price is much lower. So we'll see what happens. I really can't predict price movement. It's really dependent upon so many factors, and it's a very complicated ecosystem where you have to have merchants, you have to have consumers, you have speculators and investors, and then you have government regulation where they could put out an announcement that just causes the price to either go up or go down, which is quite interesting because they'll often say something like Bitcoin is quite volatile, and then they'll make an announcement to essentially create the volatility in Bitcoin, and they say, hey, we told you so.
Yeah, I've had some thoughts along that angle as far as making the news to make sure that you can get in at the right position. I think we've seen that before. What I see in your responses has to do with various forms of friction, and as far as moving the Bitcoin market further, we've got to remove these sources of friction and essentially roadblocks that are inhibiting Bitcoin's acceptance. I mean, currently there's a high degree of this friction in cryptocurrencies that is, hindering that acceptance. So, we talked about this before versus technological, legal, insurance solutions and things like that to reduce that friction. I wanted to ask you, what ways do you see to reduce that friction to basically make Bitcoin a more seamless experience for the mainstream?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, at this point, we're in a bit of a paradox where, in order to create Bitcoin adoption, we do need to have relationships with banks so that people can easily move on and off of the Bitcoin on-ramps and off-ramps to buy and sell Bitcoin. And it's very difficult to get those relationships because, and it's not, and I don't say the banks are any way threatened by Bitcoin per se. They're more under these very intense regulations, and they can't do certain things or they can't accept certain risky businesses just because of the way the regulations are set up on them. So, for example, exchanges have problems getting bank accounts. Obviously, we're unable to get insurance on wallets and exchanges. So a lot of these things have to do with just very poor banking relationships. And I've been told by people in the banking industry that the banks are very interested in integrating Bitcoin either as wallet services or payment mechanisms or remittance services between themselves. So they are very interested in it.
Like a natural transition they should be making, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, none of them really like the cross-bank or the inter-exchange fees between the banks. So they all want to get rid of this, and they all want to improve forex rates. So they all want to get involved in this, but unfortunately, the current regulations, or not even necessarily current regulations, but the unclear where Bitcoin sits in the current regulatory structure, forces them to simply wait it out and see. So I think once those things have been cleared up, and I'm not particularly fond of regulations, I have to say that to begin with. But once these things kind of get worked out, I think you'll see some major banks coming on board, and at that point you're going to have basically the stamp of approval, and you'll have consumers coming in mass.
Okay. This seems to have a lot of similarity to what we talked about before with Paul Gambles from MBMG Group in one of our previous interviews. I'm sorry, Joanne Bainham from Meet and Optimal Capital. Yeah, we interviewed her on the same day. Anyways, we were talking about the new banks of China being ICBC, Agricultural Bank of China, and Construction Bank, and so on and so forth, and rather being Taobao, Baidu, and Tencent, in the sense that they seem to get the idea that this digital currency, even if it's not cryptocurrency per se, is here to stay, and they position themselves as banks, and it's working. It's working to the point that you have banks in Taiwan that are definitely bringing this up in their meetings, and they're definitely aware and surprised. How is so much money coming into these companies just by the fact that they decided to put up a sign that says, hey, we're a bank, put your money here with us? So I wanted to ask, in the Western world, I mean, are we looking at, Google, Facebook, and eBay becoming, the new banks, and is this coming by way of Bitcoin? Or if not, then what are we looking at alternatively? Are we looking at more nimble players that we've never heard of that are just going to just come out of left field nowhere, and they will become the new banks of America and Europe and so on and so forth? So really, I'm asking you a question about China has already successfully, you could argue, challenged the traditional banking model. We haven't seen that yet in the Western world. What do you think's in store for the Western world in that sense?
Well, I would say it's yes to both of those, that you're going to have new players coming in that are going to be the new types of banks. For example, Coinbase is an excellent example of this, where we have a wallet service, and in addition to them being a merchant account service and all these different services rolled into one. You're going to also have traditional players like PayPal getting involved. I know PayPal CEO just announced that they're looking very intensely at Bitcoin, and from what I understand, they're developing a multi-currency wallet. And
Well, I think they have to. Otherwise, it's an adversarial relationship that they have to compete against. It's better off for them to become part of Bitcoin rather than go against it, because in the long run, they'll lose.
yeah, absolutely. And if you look at like Amazon, if an Amazon or somebody like that took it on, somebody with exchange experience, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the EC2 system,
Can you
but you
explain
can
that?
the Amazon system
Oh, yeah, yeah,
so they actually have an exchange system where if you buy too much hardware, basically you can rent their hardware, but if you overbuy it, you can then put it up on an exchange for someone else to sell or someone else to buy from you. So they have experiences with exchanges, they have experience with wallets, they have experience with marketplaces. So that could be an instant hit as far as the Bitcoin front goes
yeah.
if they were to take it on. So you're going to have, and then you'll have the traditional players, the banks getting involved with this too. But I think before that really happens, you'll probably see the innovators in the space, the small startups like the Coinbases, and then probably the intermediary steps would be the PayPals, and then eventually the banks will say, we better get involved with this, and they'll probably either do it themselves or they'll buy out some of those innovators.
Interesting, interesting. And we're talking about moving into new spaces here. And, we haven't really heard too much. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't heard too much of an actual Bitcoin-based IPO going on,
Well,
correct?
that's not necessarily true. You had a long time ago a company called Satoshi Dice, which is a gambling site, which offered shares in Bitcoin, paid dividends in Bitcoin, and eventually sold themselves to another investor in Bitcoin. So you have purely Bitcoin IPO'd companies. You also have
Purely Bitcoin IPO company. That's interesting, but I'm talking about more of the mainstream.
you
Now,
have a reverse merger IPO out of Australia as well, where the Bitcoin
you,
company bought a listed company in order to get listed.
okay,
Right?
interesting.
No, you haven't had a purely Bitcoin startup go from startup to IPO.
Okay. I'm gonna just throw an idea out there. We haven't, in I guess you would say the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal sense, had a purely Bitcoin company IPO that's out there yet.
Hmm.
And there's an IPO within the Bitcoin ecosphere itself, but not within the traditional financial sphere. And I was thinking, as you know, about 2 days ago or 3 days ago or so, Cambodia is going to have their second ever company going on the Cambodian Stock Exchange. And first and second and third companies matter when it comes to a country stock exchange, and especially if you think where Cambodia could very well be 20 years ago. The progress that they've made since Pol Pot has been, quite impressive. Anyways, there's only two companies on the Cambodian Stock Exchange. There's very few, just a handful, in the Laos Stock Exchange, and Burma is just getting started. What if there was a Bitcoin company that was the first, the second, or the third company to ever be on that country's stock exchange? Would that not write history? And I would almost dare say that that could be more of an influential and impactful move than simply just being another stock on the NYSE or the traditional markets, Hang Seng and something like that. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and just as an idea, and just kind of see what what we get into about that.
I really don't know. All I could say is Cambodia is a fantastic country. I love visiting there.
Uh,
I would look, yeah, I really don't know what the effect of
It
that
doesn't
would
have
be.
to just be Cambodia. It could be any frontier
Yeah.
market that needs something like this to
Hmm.
be remembered for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And if Cambodia or Myanmar,
Hmm.
or we could even be talking about Djibouti in Africa, would be smart enough to do something like this, as far as Bitcoin would exist,
Hmm.
it would always be known that, hey, the first Bitcoin IPO was in this country. That's going to, just by way of that, drive a lot of money into that country's exchange by the fact that there is a Bitcoin company there. So we're looking at something like that. Now, just to throw a little basis underneath that claim, Djibouti is a country that's right at the next to Somalia and Ethiopia, and it's situated right along the eastern coast, you know, touching on the Indian Ocean, and that's a major, major transport and logistics hub for products and to be coming in from China and elsewhere in Asia. You have some big investors that are making a big port. It's called the Doralay port over there, and it's going to be quite big. We could be looking at, because of the sheer size of Djibouti and the small population and the amount of economic benefit that can be coming, because Africa needs a major connection point for all of the goods coming through it. And if Djibouti does that, by basis just of their population, we could be looking at Djibouti being the Singapore of Africa in about 20 years. So if Djibouti, which is also another country that's going to come online with a stock market in the near future, would be so wise as to put a Bitcoin company out there, nobody would forget Djibouti.
Yeah, I think it's probably more likely to come in a place like Panama, where there's you currently have several Bitcoin companies located out of there.
Okay.
Or possibly Costa Rica, or one of those more you know, entrepreneurial-friendly countries.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Definitely, definitely. That's an interesting thing. Now, you know, Squawkonomics, we focus a lot on frontier markets, so I want to touch on countries that probably should have more Bitcoin acceptance than there is. I mean, you have a country like Kenya, okay? A country like Kenya, basically, they skipped the gap between brick-and-mortar banks and you know, electronic, because they had no brick and mortar banks. Okay. Yeah. Then you had a company come in called M-Pesa, and they basically say, hey, listen, you can transfer money. It's still in the Kenyan currency, but you can transfer that money through cell phone and basically pay that way. You can store your money on your phone that way, and this and that. And M-Pesa has had incredible success paving its way into the Kenyan marketplace, and you're just it just makes you think that why hasn't Bitcoin really made some huge inroads into Kenya yet? And the only thing that I can think about it is, again, I think it has to do with friction and the fact that M-Pesa solved the friction problem, and Bitcoin has not yet solved that friction problem, which is why we haven't had this you know, massive market penetration in any country yet. Even though the M-Pesa was not around for that long, they were able to saturate the market in Kenya very quickly. So I'm just kind of wondering that, you know, there's other countries like Kenya that haven't made moves like this, and they're still relatively unbanked. They don't even have, you know, the infrastructure for banks. It would make sense for them to skip that process entirely and move to a format like Bitcoin. Have you seen anything in any sort of other countries, maybe in Central Asia or in Africa or, you know, South America, like you said, that are making just the skip from no banks to just electronic currencies, electronic payments?
Yeah, I know that we spoke about Cambodia earlier. I met a gentleman a couple of weeks ago from a bank out of Cambodia, and he said, you know, 90% of people there are unbanked. So they were seriously looking at a cryptocurrency as a solution to help these people get banked. So they're certainly looking at it as a way to do it, especially when you consider that Bitcoin would allow their local merchants to sell their goods to a worldwide audience with, you know, almost no transaction fees almost instantly, and with no chance of chargebacks, and they could then buy their supplies overseas as well as they needed.
A Bitcoin ATM is already in Phnom Penh over there, so they already have that traction going.
Cool, cool. Yeah, I mean, so it's just a matter of reducing costs to them as well. And you know, there's a lot of advances with Bitcoin coming on. As I mentioned earlier, colored coins. This could not only be pegged to the gold, but it could possibly be pegged to the local. You know, I know Cambodia, they use U.S. dollars and they also use their local currency, but it could be pegged to their local currency. And in this way, they're trading in a familiar currency, and then you'd have a gateway that would then transact that from their local currency back into Bitcoin, and then they could then, you know, send whatever amount they needed to send the amount of Bitcoin that they needed out the other end. So it really could, as you said, leapfrog existing infrastructures and an existing banking system if they were to take these on. I haven't heard of anyone doing this yet, so this is, you know, very speculative, very, you know, future forecasting. As far as M-Pesa, from what I understand, there was a group that did integrate Bitcoin with it, but it was shut down. And I don't know exactly why that happened, but there's certainly no reason that you couldn't take an M-Pesa transaction create some sort of gateway, and then translate that into a Bitcoin transaction. In other words, for every $10 of M-Pesa money, it gets translated into, let's say, a point, zero point 0.1 Bitcoin or 0.01 Bitcoin as the currency fluctuates.
Sure. That's probably got to be the #1 business opportunity right now in Bitcoin, is integrating Bitcoin into the existing financial services that are successful. And like I said,
Yeah.
you take an adversarial situation and you turn it around so that it becomes mutually beneficial for all involved. And how are you going to say no to that? I mean, that's like, the deal you can't refuse. That's the ultimate Godfather offering. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I met someone from Visa a few weeks ago, and he said to me, Bitcoin actually scares me a bit. And I said, well, it doesn't have to. You have all these mechanisms in the shops for taking transactions, and you're paying about half of that transaction fee to the bank. What if you kept it all, and then on the back end of it just transmitted the Bitcoin? So it doesn't have to be adversarial. It can be integrated into existing infrastructure, and everyone could be benefiting from this frictionless technology.
I don't know exactly how much the transaction fees are in Singapore for the Bitcoin ATMs and so on and so forth, but I do know that they're more profitable at this point for the ATM services than traditional ATMs. Am I correct?
I don't know how much a traditional ATM operator would be generating. A bank or somebody usually does it more of a service for their customers.
Cool.
But the ATMs generally here are running about 5% commission. I know in some places.
Singapore is, okay, so they run at a high percentage anyways.
Yeah, most of the ATMs around the world run between 5 to 7%, I would say.
Okay.
And it's actually 5% here is actually quite low, considering that we have to do wire transfers abroad in order to take care of these transactions for the clients. Because I operate one of these ATMs, so I know it quite intimately.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I understand that Bitcoin has a zero transaction cost, but it requires a little technological know-how, and again, it requires reducing the friction for the mainstream to be able to access that zero transaction cost, because most people are not going to do it that way.
Yeah.
In the meantime, that means quite a fat profit margin for companies that embrace convenience over having them, actually physically send it to their Bitcoin wallet and have it confirmed and this and that. And I have to be honest here that even when I send money in Bitcoin to an exchange, sometimes, and I understand it, but psychologically, why isn't it there? Well, why is my balance still showing zero?
Right.
When it's going to refresh? Is there anything happening with it? These are all issues that need to be overcome, or otherwise the mainstream person is going to be like, why does it say I have zero in my account? Imagine how many customer service calls there would be just based on that. Why isn't the money in the account? Why isn't the money in the account? Why isn't Sir, you're going to have to please calm down. Your money will be available in 20 minutes. What do you mean it'll be available in 20 minutes? Why isn't it available now?
Yep.
Now society, and then you have Bitcoin as a solution where you got to wait 20, 30 minutes for a transaction. So once that is solved, and once that, again, that friction is reduced, then we're looking at, seriously, the sky is the limit here. And then,
I mean, admittedly, we still have a long way to go as far as making it easy to use. We still have a long way to go as far as making exchanges comfortable and secure, and hopefully insured, and all those traditional things that you would have when you put your money somewhere, and possibly even advanced technologies that allow you to keep your money at an exchange, but prevents the exchange from actually controlling that money. Because right now, basically, what you do is you hand over your Bitcoin to the exchange, and it gets mixed in with everyone else's. And like a bank, they give you a balance. So they're actually controlling your Bitcoin.
Issues with commingling of accounts.
Exactly. Well, all the Bitcoin get mixed together into the exchange's wallet. You no longer control them like you normally would. Just like you do at a bank when you give them your money, you no longer control that cash. It gets mixed in, and you just get a balance on your screen. And then when you log in, it shows you the balance. When you log out, it gets zeroed out and put somewhere else. So that happens on an exchange right now, or most online wallet services. So you're handing over your keys, you're handing over your Bitcoin to them. So they're coming out with new technologies which will allow you to send those Bitcoin to them, but they don't really control them. You need it's multi-signature transactions where you actually have to sign them over for them to go out or to go into or to be exchanged and things like that. So there's really cool technologies that are coming out that are going to make it more secure. As far as making it easier to use, again, that's coming. There's a company called 37 Coins that allows you to send and receive Bitcoin via SMS.
Okay.
So it's an SMS-based wallet, and I just signed up for that the other day and played around with it, and it's a cool technology. It's a very easy way to use and send Bitcoin.
And we could certainly have some solutions, such as CoinPip, that would have means in reducing that friction. So I mean, there already are tools out there. It's just the sense that they are still relatively not well known for what they can do to reduce that friction.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. So I was at a seminar a few weeks ago, and we're talking about Bitcoin, and a woman says, "Well, how come you're not like Western Union? How come you have a brand problem?" And no one said it, but Western Union's 200 years old, or 1890, 1870 something, so 140 years, and hundreds of or thousands of little locations all over the place, and millions of dollars in branding, and Bitcoin's 5 years old, so you got to give it a little bit of leeway when you talk about where we're at and where it's going.
I would like to cap this all off with the general tone that I got from you, which is that all of your statements got capped off with having to do with regulation and governments and how they were being regulated. So, we're already looking at countries. For instance, here in Thailand, the regulation process didn't go all that well. At the same time, we have many instances in history where a new technology or a new method of doing something came and it was quickly regulated. But history tells us that good ideas don't get regulated out of existence. They just kind of have to pass through this process of making the regulators more comfortable with it, and so on and so forth. And I was talking about this with Jeff Cho from Ernst & Young in our previous interview, as far as he said that the Taiwanese authorities have no idea what to do with these Bitcoins that are going to start coming into Taiwan. And like your contact at Visa said, is not comfortable with it. And it's the same thing as far as the Taiwanese tax authorities. It's intimidating right now. But at the same time, I think it was also intimidating to have roads and automobiles and traffic lights in the inception. My great-grandfather designed the traffic lights in the city of Chicago, and he said it was a daunting process. And how to decide how long is the red light going to be, how long is the green light going to be for, and this and that. Well, as you can see now, it's all second nature. So I honestly take a look at all of this and see a new technology getting some pushback from the status quo, and you have some government regulation that comes from that. But I think that, like I said, good ideas always pass through in the end. And so I see that for Thailand. I would see that for Vietnam. I would see that for Russia eventually too.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's no way for any of these countries to truly control the protocol. What they can do is they can block the on-ramps and off-ramps, the cash coming into Bitcoin and the cash going out. And they can only really control that on the banking end of it. On the individual end of it, there's no way that they can prevent that. I know when you were in Singapore, you could have met up with me and I could have sold you some Bitcoin in person. In fact, all that it's going to do in places like Vietnam and China and other places that stop it from transacting is it's going to drive up the price in their locations as it goes underground. So, short term, yeah, it causes a price drop, but long term, I think in those locations, it'll cause a price increase, just like, any sort of bootleg product would. People there are still going to want to buy Bitcoin in order to transfer their wealth from those countries to other countries, or buy products that they couldn't necessarily buy within their own jurisdictions in other jurisdictions. So it's really going to come down to a question of which countries allow free trade, which countries allow free movement of capital, and which countries prevent that from happening. And that's what we're seeing in Russia or China or Vietnam.
Israel right now, Bill Still is talking about how Israel is having some massive reforms in their monetary policy and the way they think about monetary theory, and that's going to come to more and more countries. It's just that Israel is one of the first countries that sees the need to really rethink.
Yeah. The thing is, people have a very short attention span. They have a very short memory. We've already forgotten the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and we're back to business as usual. The banks are pretty levered up again. You probably know more about that than I do, but so as long as people's 401ks are back up and they got something interesting on TV, they generally don't worry about things like that. So we'll see what happens in the long term as far as the developed countries. In the developing countries, this is where I think you're really going to see it take off as far as remittance usage and small dollar transactions, things like that. That it really reduces the friction. In the more developed countries, I see in Singapore a lot of people are buying it as an investment or a speculation, more so probably than merchant usage. But the merchant usage is certainly picking up as well. So I mean, this is a train that's moving ahead, and either the countries are going to jump on board or they're going to get run over by it.
Well, I'm waiting for the story to come. I'm waiting for a country, let's just say like Bangladesh, that has incredibly impoverished people that in their society it's very hard for them to get ahead. Maybe it's in a caste system, maybe it's in another system that basically assures that, hey, you're a part of X, member of society. Guess what?
Yeah.
You're not had in this country. And I think it's a matter of time before they're going to look at something like Bitcoin or one of the other cryptocurrencies and say, well, I'm going to define my own future, and I'm not going to wait for the caste system or some other restrictive system to design it for me. And I'm personally waiting for that next big story. And like I said, maybe it'll come out of Cambodia, maybe it'll come out of Kenya, maybe it'll come out of Pakistan or Bangladesh. We'll have to see as far as that.
I mean, we've had similar things happen. I mean, Ukraine recently, they had the revolution there and all the problems there, and they had capital controls enforced there, and you saw some people moving to Bitcoin in that area, but in the wider world, it really didn't affect it. You had the similar thing. Well, actually, Cyprus, it did affect the price of Bitcoin, but I don't know if it changed the adoption rate of Bitcoin per se. But you see this time and time again where you have these regimes falling, you have currency controls enacted or robbing of people's money as they did in Cyprus, and they're talking about doing in England as if you owe taxes, they're going to be able to raid your bank account. So those things I think localized are going to get people interested in Bitcoin more. But within your own little area, until you feel it yourself, you generally don't feel it. You don't really see it happening. So
one thing I will say is that as far as Bitcoin adoption in places like Singapore and Taiwan, where they're not printing currency like drunken sailors, is
right.
that they fail to necessarily see the need for it. But then you have countries that are making their citizens think that, well, the currency that I'm holding right now is going to be worth nothing in 10 years. I mean, what am I going to do on this current path? So, there's certainly going to be some good things, amazing things for Bitcoin coming from countries that have the adversity, and not the countries that are more complacent and they're comfortable with the situation and so on and so forth. And I would cap it off if I could with this. I and a friend back in about 2011. We were talking about Bitcoin at the time, and he worked at the Swiss embassy for an Asian country at the time, and we over dinner we were talking about Bitcoin and where it should go, and we were thinking about, okay, the environments of the global financial crisis and the fact that nothing really got fixed really creates the demand for Bitcoin, because if we didn't have a problem in our financial system, we wouldn't have a need for Bitcoin. And back at that time, we both agreed, we had consensus that Bitcoin should reach 1 ounce of gold at the time, but it would not go over that, because then you would start to get into some serious issues of psychologically what's more valuable, like an ounce of gold or a Bitcoin. And I think that that's when we would start to have some really major friction in the price of a Bitcoin. And it manifested itself in I guess you would say the competing currencies dynamic that unfolded because of that. So I find that to be very interesting, that not only did that play out, but again, market forces were activated, and the price would not relatively go over that 1 ounce of gold, because the psychological barrier was too much. People snapped and realized they had to snap in action and to do something about it, to capture these market forces. And so now we have 200, 300 different cryptocurrencies. And, Bill Still says that if we are going towards the 1920s, all over again in the U.S., there were 3,000 versions of competing currencies. So as far as he's concerned, there's a lot more room in the cryptocurrency market to have more competitors. But just as he said before, the cryptocurrency market will settle. It'll kind of turn into how we use the internet today. I mean, don't we all use about 4 or 5 main sites nowadays?
Hmm.
10, 12, 15 years ago, we used 40, 50 on our browsers, right? So it's all going to consolidate to something and to a head. And Bitcoin certainly has the potential to consolidate with that, along with some other currencies. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
Hmm.
That
No, I would agree, and I think that a big part of it, of this consolidation and mainstream usage of Bitcoin, has to do with alternative uses of the blockchain. For example, I just read about somebody figuring out a way to use it to unlock content on a web page. In other words, you don't have to necessarily send money in order to unlock the content. You can sign a transaction, and that would show that you're authorized to view the content. So you're using the cryptography built into the Bitcoin wallet system to unlock content, or this way you don't have to log in with an ID necessarily. So you can have that pseudo-anonymous login available using the technology. So, and I think once these ideas get built into hardware especially, then you're really going to have Bitcoin as the leader in this space, because once it gets built into hardware, it's very hard to change. Right now, it's still mainly software, and software you can transition from one thing to another, just like we did from MySpace to Facebook. So, there's certainly possibility of competition for Bitcoin at this point, but I think as it leads ahead, as it gains market share and market cap and integration into other systems, it's really going to leave the competitors behind.
What I'm honestly surprised about is why Facebook didn't see something like this coming, realized that they already had the user base and the people to outright create their own, Facebook currency. And that was a huge, massive missed opportunity for them that I honestly thought that was going to go ahead. And
Yeah, I thought that they were trying that and it wasn't working.
so failed implementation.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, again,
But that's not necessarily, they it might not necessarily be the end of it for them. They might try again,
well,
something
again, we're
that
talking about
happens.
turning an adversarial relationship into a
Yeah.
cooperative one. If Facebook and Bitcoin came together, well, then that would be the end of the story right there.
Yeah. In fact, recently here, OCBC announced that you can now pay people via Facebook, but it's not a true pay people via Facebook integration, and it's actually quite clunky relative to a Bitcoin payment because you have to actually transfer a password to the other person somehow, rather than just sending them the asset like we do in Bitcoin. But certainly, people will develop systems that'll ride on top of Facebook to be able to use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Fascinating, fascinating. And I think that we have a very interesting view of what might very well be coming for Bitcoin. Bitcoin having the first IPO in a developing country to solidify the name of Bitcoin in the developing world. We have a possibility for Bitcoin to be a huge ally with existing large and small internet companies. And in the case of small internet companies, could rise their status to be the next big players for the next 20, 30 years. And we have a lot of other various insight from resident Singapore Bitcoin expert David Moskowitz from Coin Republic and Bitcoin Singapore. Thank you so much for being with us today. And do you have any last things that you would like to mention before we go?
No, I think you covered quite a bit there. Thank you for having me on. Keep making those videos. I really enjoy the street view of what people really think about Bitcoin, and it's interesting to see it compared with other assets as well. So, thanks
Definitely,
for doing
definitely.
that.
And I would say with what we have recently done, I think that the results are even more interesting than simply asking people, well, what do you think about Bitcoin?
Hmm.
Because there's a little bit added a variable added that I think that would make the insight a little bit more interesting. At least we hope so.
Cool.
So, anyways, you have a wonderful day there in Singapore, and this was a Squawkonomics interview with David Moskowitz in Chiang Mai, Thailand.